Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from March 12th, 2021, and I'm recording this on September 10th, 2021. So, as always, I give those dates so you just know when this information is relevant because the market's always moving. And we're also, as always, looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 from that week and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. They each put out a list of 10. We look at both those lists. We talk about each of those books. I usually do a video at the time making predictions, and then I come back here 6 months later and see what they've done so that we can understand what factors made these books hot back then, but then what has happened since. Would you have been better off being patient? What kind of books do you want to chase? What kind of books do you want to be patient on so we can make better decisions about which books we go after and when we go after them? So this week we got 19 different books between the two lists, which means I got a lot of books to talk about. So let's get into this list. First up, we have Kanto, number 1. It's the first of several Ops and News books this week. And this one hit the list. It had been going for pretty good value anyway, just because people were loving the series, and then the book was really hard to get to 9.8. But then we got news of an animated series coming, which caused this book to spike and hit the list. Raw copies were going for 150 plus. Back then, they didn't give a 9.8 value at the time. I predicted this would be straight cash. I thought this was going to keep going. It's actually been a bit of an I'll be back, although it's kind of been steady. Raw copies are now 100 to 200, so occasionally more than what it was going there then, but also a little bit less. 9.8s on this, like I said, are all the way up to 800 to 1,000, and it really has to do with how hard it is to get a 9.8 in this first print of number 1 because of all the damage that they received. Next, we have Cartoon Network starring number 1 with the first appearance of the Powerpuff Girls in comics. This hit the list because we had casting for the live action Powerpuff Girls show that's supposedly coming to the CW. That show has went through a bunch of stuff since then. One of the main actresses has already dropped out. They're doing a rewrite on the pilot. We'll see if this amounts to anything, but back then the book jumped to $80 for a raw copy, and 8.5 because there wasn't many slabbed, went for 125. Now raw copies are still 50 to 70. 9.8 goes clear up to 600. Again, not many of them. Plus, this kind of books, usually this kind of kids-oriented book, tough to find in high grade. But this has turned into a bit of an I'll be back. It's definitely down. We'll see if this show ever amounts to anything with all the troubles they've had. Our next book is also related to that show. It is Powerpuff Girls number 1 from 2000. So not their first appearance, but their first solo title, technically. Raw copies of this were $60 to $70 back then, going for as much, basically, as the Cartoon Network starring was, which is interesting. Now raw copies are 10 to 30. This one turned into a trap. People are not necessarily chasing this one and are chasing that other one if they're chasing it at all. Again, there's been a lot of issues with this show, so we'll see if anything ever comes of it. Next, we have Lenore, number 1, our second animated series that's supposedly coming. This is supposed to be like a Tim Burton style of this Neil Gaiman comic. Back then, raw copies were only going for 10, but there were a bunch of sales. 9.8s were up to $200. Now, raw copies will cost you $40 to $80. There's not a ton of these out there. There's not that many listings. If you go on eBay, there are a few, but not a ton. There's been no slab sales during the last 3 months period on eBay, but there's also been no sales period since about August 1st. So I say 40 to 80 because that's what it was going for June, July, but there's been no real sales here recently, so probably not actually worth that anymore because that's where people are listing it. So we'll see what it's going to take to actually get this book to move again. So technically it is up and been straight cash for the 6 months based on value, but my guess is it's coming back down right now because people are not buying it. Next, we have Slam number 1, also supposedly an animated series. This one going to HBO Max. Raw copies back then jumped up to $20. 9.8s were also going for around $200. Now raw copies are only 5 to 20 with very few sales. No slab sales recently. So this one's definitely turned into an I'll be back on the raw side. There's only supposedly only 6,500 of these ordered, so it's pretty hard to find, but we're going to have to get news. A lot of times animated shows are almost in some ways worse than live action about actually because they just take so long to actually even make. So this may come back around at some point, but we've probably got a while to wait still. With that, we're going to move into covers. I feel like I'm flying through the list this week. First up, we have Pop Kill, #1, the Adam Hughes Kickstarter variant. And this has been a super popular cover. Back then, they were talking about it, that it was only originally a $40 buy-in. It was up to $200 to $250. This was recently on the list again. Right now, raw copies are $500 to $600 of this book. 9.8 is going $750 to $950. I don't think there's been a sale for $1,000 yet, but it's been close on a couple of 9.8s. People love this Adam Hughes cover. It is a pretty low print. I thought, $200, $250, it's probably an I'll be back. It'll settle in a little lower. I was wrong. This has been up. It's a gorgeous cover. It's Adam Hughes, and people are definitely chasing it. Next, we have Children of the Atom, #1. This is the Jim Lee 1 in 100 wraparound. You can only see, I'm only showing the front here on the slide. But back then at release, this 1 in 100 was going for $150 to $250, both because people like the wraparound and there's some first appearances in here. I said then that it's kind of rare for a 1 in 100 to maintain, but this one does have some first appearances. So raw copies now are 200 to 300, so up a little bit. 9.8s are 300 to 350, only slightly higher than a raw copy. Not a ton of these out there, but this one has definitely been up so far for this Children of the Atom #1. Next we have, so those are our only two kind of covers. Comic Buzz, we have Spidey Super Stories #1. This is the first appearance of a black Spider-Man. This is not Miles Morales. This is kind of a kid that Spidey kind of helps out, and it's kind of a one-off story. Raw copies of this jumped up to $100, though. It went from like a $10 book to a $100 plus book because, first black Spider-Man or whatever was the buzz. Well, now raw copies are $5 to $30. This character hasn't ever been used again, doesn't necessarily have any legs. This definitely turned into a trap. It is way down. So definitely not one that you wanted to chase. Next, we have Nottingham, #1. This was the hot indie of the moment. Kind of a violent take on the Robin Hood story. Only this time the merry men are being seen as terrorists, and we're following the sheriff. So it's being told from the sheriff's point of view. Back then, it was $25 to $35, pretty much at release because it was a pretty low print. Right now, I will tell you right now, prices are all over the map. You see the prices I list on the slide, $30 to $60 for a raw copy, which is where the vast majority of them are going. But really, it's more like $5 to $80 is what I could have put for the range. 9.8 literally are going for $125 to $300 plus. So yeah, this book is all over the map in terms of it really hasn't settled on a value. It just sort of comes up, people listen, people are buying it and willing to spend different things. We'll see. I think I haven't heard much buzz about this since the initial buzz on this one. I look forward to some comments, maybe those of you that have kept reading it, if it's really turned out to be pretty good. But so far, it has held its value and it is even up from that initial buzz. So next we have ENIAC, #1. This is on the list for the second week in a row. This is the Bad Idea comic that was super limited, indie, that people were chasing. And raw copies of this were going for $140 to $150 back then. And this has turned into a definite trap. It's now a $40 to $50 book. This was the second week in a row. Last week, it was still under 100, I think it was going. We kind of put it as an I'll be back, but this is definitely a trap once it got up to these values. 9.8s only go for $80 to $120, which is less than what raw copies were going there at release. So definitely not one that was worth waiting on because it did turn into a trap. Next we have Magic the Gathering, the Ash Can. So there was a lot of buzz around this. This was the launch of a new Magic series coming from Boom Studios. They've tried Magic comics before. They've never had much legs. People have never been very interested in them. It was really the card game people weren't interested in. The comic people weren't interested in the card game stuff. So it just never really crossed over. But back then there was some buzz around this. People were like, okay, maybe this is actually going to be good because it's coming from Boom Studios. Raw copies back then were going for $40 to $150, a big wide range as they were coming out. People were trying to get these Ash Cans. Now they're 10 to 20. 9.8 went for $45. This one definitely turned into a trap. It just, yeah, it didn't sustain. We'll see. I don't know there's much buzz around the series. I think the series turned out to still be kind of a disappointment. So yeah, this one definitely did not hold. With that, we're going to talk about Marvel Voices, number 1. This is the first cameo of those Children of the Atom characters that we talked about in the earlier book. Probably, maybe I should have put that Jim Lee book here, but this is just how I organized it back then. Raw copies back then were going for $15 to $35 of all these new characters. Now it's a $10 to $20 book. 9.8s are around $100 to $120. So definitely an I'll be back. It's down just a little bit, but still holding decent value. A little bit of buzz around these Children of the Atom characters. I don't know, there's 4 or 5 of them. There were new mutants that had the same powers as the original X-Men or something. I haven't read this story, but supposedly we'll see if they make anything out of these characters and if they show up long term. With that, we're going to move into some of the DC movie TV side, and we got Justice League of America number 141. This is the first appearance of the Manhunters, kind of the android versions, not the guy who was the Manhunter. And basically rumors that these were going to be the villains of the upcoming Green Lantern show, which is interesting because it's also supposed to be kind of an anthology show, so we'll see. But raw copies were going for $10 to $15 back then. 9.8 was hitting $140. Now they're $5 to $30 for a raw copy, depending on the grade. So this one's been basically pretty steady. There wasn't a huge buzz back then. Still not a huge buzz. No real slab sales recently. So definitely kind of an I'll be back. You can still kind of grab this book if you want it. So next we have Action Comics number 9, also on the list for the second week in a row. So we talked about this last week. This is the second appearance of Calvin Ellis. First cover. People kind of decided this was the book they wanted for Calvin Ellis, even though it's his second appearance because of the cover. And last week we talked about it was going for like $50. By this point, it was up to $125 to $150, with a 9.6 selling for $500. So people were convinced this is the direction they were going to go with that Michael B. Jordan thing, that they weren't going to do Val-Zod or anything else. They were going with Calvin Ellis. Now, since then, it's, as I told you last week, the rumor switched a couple of times. Now the most recent rumor is it's Val-Zod is the character that they're probably going to use for the Black Superman stuff. And as a result, raw copies of this are now $15 to $30. 9.8s are only going $200 to $300, when a 9.6 back then was going for $5. This has turned into a dumpster fire if you tried to grab this during the wave. If you got in the front end, you were probably not doing that bad. But if you got in, like, in amongst the main part of the wave on this book, yeah, that did not work out well for you. Now it may still, the rumors may change and it may come back to this character, but right now that is not looking like a good investment at all. Next, we're going to move into MCU/Disney Plus stuff for our last 5 books. Yeah, we still got 5 books to go. First, we have She-Hulk number 22. This is the first appearance of Jacinda, a Skrull that disguises herself as Jennifer Walters. She's supposedly the daughter of the Super Skrull. Why is any of this relevant? Well, we're getting a She-Hulk show. And then we had a Skrull show up at the end of WandaVision. So that appearance basically was, and we know there's a secret invasion story coming. So everybody's kind of specking on any of the Skrull characters. That was what prompted this one. Back then, raw copies were $10 to $15. 9.8 going for $80. Now raw copies are $20 to $30. 9.8 going for $300, but that's only one sale. But so far, this is definitely up. I'm still not going to call this worth it based on because all the sales really are raw. Now, obviously, the 9.8 jumped a ton, but an $80 9.8 sale was probably a little low anyway. 300 is probably pretty high, but it's just one sale, so it's hard to really judge off of that. But definitely, this book is up. People are still specking on several of these Skrull characters coming to the MCU. Next, we have Daredevil number 9, the first appearance of Echo. Back then, we knew she was going to be, I think we had, there was no new news necessarily, but we knew she was coming to the MCU as part of the Hawkeye show. She'd been cast, and basically this book kind of just jumped. Raw copies were all had been steady around $50. They jumped up to around $100 back then. Now they're $125 to $200, with 9.8s going for $650 to $800. And that's all because we now know not just she's going to be in that show, she's going to get her own Disney Plus series. So they're going to be using this character several times. And this book has just continued to climb and climb and climb with this gorgeous David Mack cover. Obviously, 10 is also a book people really like, where she's on the cover. So definitely a character people have been chasing and investing in. Next, we have Captain America 323, first appearance of John Walker. Obviously, this was right before Falcon and the Winter Soldier hit, when people knew the guy was coming, so they were speccing on this. Back then, 9.8s were all the way up to $600. He played a major part of the show, but and we know he's probably going to stick around, at least for a while, but raw copies now are $30 to $60, 9.8s are down to $300 to $400. So we're definitely in the post-show lull with this character. The prices have dropped back. We'll see how much he gets used going forward and where we see him again, because we don't know for sure, and that's probably part of why it's dropped back so much. Turned into a bit of a trap, really. I mean, consider 9.8s are about half the value they were right before the show came out. Next, we have Avengers West Coast, number 56. First Dark Scarlet Witch, I guess. This is kind of in the post losing her children and losing vision, and so she kind of goes dark, and this was kind of where people think maybe the story is going to go in Multiverse of Madness after the end of WandaVision. Raw copies back then jumped up to $25 to $30. Now they're $10 to $20, 9.8's going $125 to $175. Definitely a bit of an I'll be back. It's down a little bit. Again, we're kind of in that lull. We'll see what role she plays in Multiverse of Madness. At the moment, we got all kinds of people that have kind of been causing the multiverse. So, looks like there's going to be plenty of people responsible for all this craziness. So we'll see if Wanda's really a bad guy or if she's helping put it back together. Finally, last book of the week, our 19th book we're going to talk about is Marvel Spotlight number 4. Also also a repeat from last week, or no, 2 weeks ago, I guess. This is the first appearance of the Darkhold, as well as the third Werewolf by Night, so it had some inherent value anyway. We see her with the book at the end of the show is what was prompting this to jump up. Raw copies were going for $320. 9.2 went for $675. Now raw copies are $70 to $150 plus. There was one that went for around $300. It was a super nice, claim. They were claiming 9.8. Based on the pictures, it looked like it might have been. But most part, that was kind of an outlier. Most of them are sticking around $150, even for higher grades. 9.0 recently went for $450. So another I'll be back. Again, we're in the lull post-show. So that is this week's list. We had some covers. We had some option news. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.